How do I age well? It's something I often ponder on. My name's Rosaria and I want to find out what it takes to live a healthy and happy life as we age. I'm a clinical exercise specialist, and for the past 5 years, I've worked with nearly 1,000 older adults, and as a result, have had the chance to talk to a diverse range of happy and healthy, and not so happy and healthy people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I want to know what it takes to be able to look back and confidently say, I lived an amazing life. Why not join me in this exploration on what it takes to live happily and healthily and learn how to age well? Hi everyone, I just wanted to say big sorry for not being able to post any new podcast episodes last week. I'm not been very well. I don't know if you can tell, but my nose is extremely blocked and I sound so nasally. It's horrible. So what I've done is I used to have another podcast called Mature Movers. I'm going to be releasing some of those episodes instead to keep the content fresh. These episodes are interviews with amazing people working in the later life sector and the healthy aging sector. So I hope you enjoy it. It's still really, really valuable and informative stuff that provokes food for thought around healthy aging and better health. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope to have some better, more fresher content available soon. You've just got to bear with, got to get rid of this cold, this summer cold, and it will be posted each Monday. So keep your eyes out. Don't forget to follow the podcast so you can get notified and rate and review. I would really appreciate that. Thanks so much. Hi listeners, welcome back to the Mature Movers podcast. Today we are going to be talking to Derek Slater. So Derek, let's start from the beginning, and you can introduce yourself through your journey and your career.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I feel really honored to be asked. Right. So I'm an occupational therapist by trade, and it's a bit of a lengthy story of how I actually got into it. So when I was finishing, I'm from Ireland, and when I was finishing what we would call our leaving certs, you call it here your not GCSEs, what comes after A levels. So I was finishing my A levels and I didn't know what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. And the career advisor was like, oh, maybe you should think about being a nurse or a physio. And I had zero interest in doing any of that. So I ended up studying complementary medicine at a college in Dublin for a couple of years. So I became like a personal trainer and a sports injury therapist and reflexology and aromatherapy and diet nutrition, like a whole host of really great things. But it wasn't my exact calling. I didn't get drawn into it. My sister, she's got multiple sclerosis and she lives here in London, and she was moving on to a new medication, an intravenous one. So she needed to do like injections. And she asked me if I would come over and support because it was quite a difficult transition onto that medication. So I moved over to London to help out my sister and got a job. I was super lucky. I had no experience, but I ended up getting a job working in a hospital that did neuro rehab. So I was working as an occupational therapy assistant. Excuse me. And I really loved it. And it was a great place to put some of my practical skills into practice in the hospital. And then at the same time, I really fell in love with living in London. So I transferred a course over to the University of Westminster. I was studying Chinese medicine. And so I did that in the University of Westminster and stayed working in the hospital at the same time. And the hospital were super nice. And they offered me to go to London South Bank to study to become an occupational therapist. And I was like, I can't pass up an opportunity to have free tuition. So I kind of fell into occupational therapy, but I absolutely adore it. I could not have picked a better career for myself. And that I qualified in 2009. I did the 4-year in-service training program at London South Bank. And that's how I got
Amazing.
into it.
Amazing. So, first off, what a wonderful brother to move all the way across country to support sister. That's fantastic. And I think a lot of people and listeners will resonate with the idea and the fact that you didn't know what you wanted to do and things just fell into place for you. And you mentioned that you suggest that like a college advisor had suggested nursing or physio. So I'm suggesting you might have a background in sports or fitness or health. Kind of where did that suggestion come from? And yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny because I absolutely hated PE and sports and all that kind of stuff when I was like in secondary school, because it was like rural Ireland. All they ever did and all they ever wanted to do was football, 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 football. And that just was not me at all. So when I was 16, I started yoga. And when I was 14, I started martial arts. And that's where my like love of health and fitness came from. And that's why the career guidance teachers, they do like aptitude tests, and it would be all like, this is the area that I'm interested in, but it wasn't the standard route that I was interested in going. I did interview for nursing, but it just wasn't for me at all. And I ended up finding this course by myself, and I was super lucky to get on the course in complementary medicine, and that's where I got my qualifications in health and fitness and personal training.
Yeah, amazing. And I think, I mean, you have this regular snobby attitude from academics looking kind of at vocational qualifications and not necessarily being as good as a degree or kind of that level. So, whereas from my own experience and just seeing it, having those combined experiences, and you just kind of had such an amazing, I mean, that course sounds incredible. I've never heard of anything like that in the UK or near me, where you get all these complementary opportunities within the health and fitness industry. So that's in itself is an amazing opportunity. And also, I guess you learned so many things and had so many different perspectives throughout that experience. And then you mentioned you went on to being an occupational therapy assistant. And for those that are listening that don't really know what that means, can you explain what an OTA is?
Of course, I'll explain occupational therapy because literally nobody will know what it is. I didn't even know what it was. So I think the best way, I've got my own definition. There's loads of, like, there's the World Federation of Occupational Therapists who have their own definition. There's the Royal College of Occupational Therapists that have their own definition. So every country in the world will have their own definition, but I've came up with my own. So the way I see it is everything that you do during the day to fill your time can be qualified as an occupation. So from getting up in the morning, getting washed and dressed, to doing your taxes online, to playing video games, to sleeping, every section of the time is an occupation. So an occupational therapist is somebody who supports you to do something that you used to be able to do, but can't do anymore because of an injury or an illness. So that a good example would be somebody who's had a stroke. Before, they used to be able to get in and out of their bath, no problem. And now they might have some left-sided weakness and they can't do that transfer anymore. So an OT will come out and either look at what kind of exercises we can do with you to strengthen you up, or what kind of equipment or modifications we can do to be able to get you back into the bath or have that wash in a different way. Or it's also somebody who, if you have a particular goal that you want to achieve, so say before you've never been able to make beans and toast, and it might be because of some birth defect that you have, or maybe a learning disability, an OT is the person who will work with you to give you those skills to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do.
So that sounds really, really rewarding. And I've actually had the opportunity to work with some OTs and OTAs within hospital fields. And I guess for some people who could be listening, they never even realized that that was a need for somebody. Because if you're not surrounded by somebody who needs special attention, whether it's, as you said, if they want to strengthen up their left or right side so that they can move better, or just want to make beans on toast, I think we take these things for granted. And there are a lot of people out there that could be a goal, like climbing Mount Everest for them,
Yeah,
kind of
completely.
level.
Definitely.
So you've done all of that work. Before we go on to the next part of your story and your journey, I'm guessing that you work with a lot of people who are over the age of 60. Just from what you were saying, because obviously sometimes we develop through the aging process or through time, we develop certain illnesses or disabilities. And when you've been working with that within that population, kind of what are the key characteristics that you have seen within that industry? And are there any stories that you can share with us?
Oh my goodness. I would safely say, so throughout my career, I've always worked with, not always, but primarily worked with adults, so it's 18 plus. And I would safely say at least 80% of that population have always been 60 plus. Wow, what kind of stories? I don't think I don't think any of my OT community social services stories are suitable for a podcast, because all the ones you remember are the ones that you shouldn't be remembering.
Do you have any PG versions that you could share?
Yeah, like definitely. I've had so many, like, not to, because it's always going to be a team sport. Being an OT, you're never going to do anything by yourself. I've had some really good success stories. One that was actually brought to my attention yesterday. An old colleague that I worked with was asking me about, because they were doing a training course, and they were asking me about this particular patient that I had, who was morbidly obese, like the definitions of morbidly obese, and she was living in a 2-story house. And couldn't get access to the community at all. She was pretty much stuck on the first floor. So we did a lot of work about rehousing. Excuse me. So we ended up finding a bungalow. So considering that this is an inner London city borough, ended up finding a bungalow and having it completely remodeled. So having the doors widened, ramps put in, level access shower put in, specialist equipment. So normally when you work with cases like this, you're supposed to like go in, do your assessment, do the intervention plan. Most of the interventions will be done like on your computer or referring over to different services, etc. And then when everything that you recommended is done, you go back out and review. But this particular case, because it was really, really complex, obviously you're aware of all the like comorbidities that will go along with
Obesity.
Yeah. Particularly around like heart problems. She had lots of strain in her lungs when she was breathing because of the weight of her chest. So I made it a case to be a lot more hands-on, and we looked at different types of mobility aids. So for her, being able just to get from her bed to the bedside commode was a massive achievement. But what we ended up doing with the use of appropriate equipment and some exercise and some lifestyle changes was actually get her to be able to mobilize within this new environment. So not only was she able to get to the bedside commode, but she was actually able to use a frame and walk all the way into the bathroom, and then all the way into the kitchen. And just a really simple activity that we would take for granted became like an exercise routine for her. So yeah, she's, as far as I'm aware, still alive and kicking today. So that was a huge bonus case for me. I that's one that sticks out in my head.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that sounds very rewarding. I'm kind of like, yes, I did my job right. I kind of helped somebody, because as you said, we take these things for granted, like getting up in the middle of the night and going to the toilet, or getting up in the middle of the night and getting a drink. And many of us take that for granted. But for many people, that is a huge effort to achieve within a day. So going back to your journey, so you've become an OTA and you're getting some experience. What happens next?
Yeah, so I was working in a hospital doing neuro rehab. I was at the University of Westminster doing Chinese medicine. We're all like, yeah, we'll definitely sponsor you to do OT. So I interviewed, got a place on the 4-year in-service program at London South Bank. And that's where you work 3 days a week and go to uni 2 days a week. And it's a 4-year course. And I absolutely loved it. I mean, I'd been to university before, but going to this university while you're at work at the same time is completely different. I really feel like you absorb the knowledge a lot more because you can practically apply it to your work. And then when I qualified, I honestly thought that I was going to go into the world of neuro rehab, because I was fascinated with the brain and how it works, and it's like such an infant area of research.
Expertise, yeah.
But I ended up going into social services, which I was not expecting at all. So working for local authorities and the government instead of the NHS. Excuse me. And then I managed to work for a couple of really great inner London boroughs. And then in my last job, I managed a couple of services. I managed the complex occupational therapy, reablement, and that's for facilitating people out of hospital. So if they're medically fit to come out of hospital, we'll send in carers to rehabilitate them back up to their baseline. The sensory team, which you know what that is, and adaptation service.
Okay, amazing. So you've been doing all of this stuff, and I know just from kind of connecting with you online that you are also a carer yourself. And how has that kind of linked in together? And I guess you had all this experience and this knowledge and this awareness of what a carer was and what's required to be a carer. So if you don't mind sharing the story about how you've become a carer yourself to a family member and
absolutely,
that.
no problem. Yeah, so I have an elderly aunt. It's her birthday tomorrow, 1st of April. She's going to be 92. And she's got Alzheimer's dementia. And 4 years ago, she was living independently by herself, but really, really struggling. She had a pendant alarm, and in 1 week called out the ambulance 22 times. She was a frequent faller, in and out of hospital all the time. And then the last fall that she had was pretty bad, and she ended up going into a regional neuro rehab hospital, very similar to the one that I worked in. And they were supposed to give her 6 weeks rehab, and she ended up being in there for 3 months, never got back to her baseline, but they wanted to discharge her back to her home environment. And I knew that if she went home, she lived in a 3-story house, that it would be a massive no-no. It would be just day one, and either she would end up back in hospital or she'd have a fall that would be the end of her. We made a massive decision to move her out of her beautiful house. She lived outside of Brighton, a beach-fronted 3-story house, to my tiny little Hackney London flat with 2 bedrooms and me and my partner. Initially, we thought it was going to be like a temporary solution until we could find her somewhere else to live that was more suitable. But yeah, you made plans and God laughs kind of thing. She moved in, and she's made it very clear that she never wants to move out.
And how do you say no to that, right? Oh, bless. Well, I mean, it's very inspiring what you're doing.
Thank you.
Being a carer, and I've worked within domiciliary care before, but living, so that is a
Oh my
full-time job.
goodness.
And
It's such a hard job. Like you said, before I was actually a carer, I had loads of experience with care. So being an OT, you'd go in and you'd be all like, do this, do that, it's fine, bye. When you're actually living it, it is completely different. It is so, so hard. Like, don't get me wrong, it has been the best learning lesson of my life and I love it. But like, there's some days, even for me, like your willpower is finite, and there are some days where I'm like, Lord Jesus,
send help.
Jesus, take the wheel. This is hard.
Yeah, I mean, from just experiencing with that within my family. So I have mentioned my grandma before in some of the other podcasts, but she has also got Alzheimer's, and my auntie is her carer. But unfortunately, they're both very unwell, and being a full-time carer is, I think, one of the most rewarding jobs, but one of the most difficult and challenging jobs in the planet, because you have to discipline yourself to be a carer and a loved one at the same time. And sometimes you have to look at it as a job, and sometimes you have to look at it as, this is somebody who I really care about,
Mhm.
and I need to treat them in a respectful way, but I need to also kind of maintain boundaries for my own mental health. So you've got all these struggles pulling you in all sorts of directions, and I know that you're also working on some new exciting projects. So how has these life experiences in your journey led to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as I said before, I was working as an occupational therapist in an inner London borough. I was managing 4 teams. And part of my role was also managing single-handed care project. So that's where if you have 2 carers, you send an OT out and they'll analyze and observe and watch to see what's happening, and then make recommendations for what kind of equipment can be provided to reduce the package of care down to 1 carer, because there's lots of times where people don't really feel like it's dignified having 2 carers there, particularly if one person is standing around watching what's happening. So I managed that service, and at the same time, I was part of the recommissioning of care for the contracts. So I was looking at it from like a behind the scenes perspective. So looking at what councils want when it comes to care, looking at what care agencies are actually doing, looking at how it impacts on people's health and well-being. And at the very same time, I had my aunt living with me. And obviously, when I'm at work, I had to have carers come in to look after her. Unfortunately, she's at the stage now where she's off her feet, so she needed particular equipment for transfers. And every care agency that we had come out would say our policy is, for health and safety and legal reasons, you have to have 2 carers. And I'm like, well, you show me the legislation that says that, because there is no legislation that says you have to have 2 carers. And it was an impingement on her human rights. She didn't want 2 people coming into this tiny little room and like one person holding up her dress while the other person's wiping her bottom. It's just not dignified at all. So I had to make the difficult decision, because I was doing really well in my career. I had to make the decision whether to stay and then just complain about things, or leave and be the change that I wanted to see. And I made the difficult decision to leave and be the change.
Yeah, and it is hard. I have had to make decisions like that in the past, where you're in a very comfortable and good position with your life and your career, and to tell somebody no, I have to change, and that diversion on your course can be really, I think, anxiety triggering, because of that fear of uncertainty. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? But I from what I know, it sounds like you did make the right decision.
Fingers crossed, I hope so.
Yeah.
So I started a company called Sunday Care Therapy, and I quit my job in February 2020, started the application, because when you start a care agency, you have to be registered with the CQC, the Care Quality Commission.
Yeah.
Started the application with them in March, went straight into a lockdown, and didn't get our registration until December 2020. And then we had to make the really difficult decision of like, do we go live now in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a lockdown, or do we concentrate on doing like behind the scenes stuff for now with the aim of going live in May? And that's what we decided to do. So fingers crossed, all going well on our roadmap out of lockdown, we will hopefully be able to deliver live care in May.
And what does the business model look like?
Okay.
Is it a domiciliary care company? Is it a residential care company? Or
it's a domiciliary care company. So we call our staff care partners. We send them out into the community to work with people in their own homes, much like my Aunt Gladys. The main difference is every one of our clients will have an occupational therapy assessment, and we'll determine what is important to them. And then we will, at all stages, promote independence and promote single-handed care. So I might go out, I will see somebody much like my Aunt Gladys and see that she's having difficulty with X, Y, and Z. So I will prescribe either equipment or exercises to try and get her back to her what might be a baseline. And then when my staff go out, our care partners, they will do that with her. So lots of times you'll have therapists from the NHS, like physios or OTs, who will go out and say, here, do these exercises, and give you a piece of paper, and then nothing ever happens from it. And I think you know yourself how important exercise is. So we have a massive push on making sure that people are engaged in something that they actually find important and fun.
That's amazing. And a lot of the work that Mature Movers, a project that I'm working on at the moment, also the name of the podcast, is about how do we bridge the gap between somebody saying, do this, or somebody knowing I need to do this, to somebody actually acting that process out. Yeah. And absolutely. I still think there's a lot of ways around this. And as you said, with your care partners, it's that accountability and that promotion to do it regularly. And I mean, from the experience within the health and fitness industry, from my point of view, is you get a very small percentage of people who can self-motivate. And I mean, I'm a personal trainer and I struggle to motivate myself to do exercises every day and to make sure I get my steps in and to make sure I eat well and all of those things that come with living a healthy, balanced lifestyle. But I understand the importance, and I do have a sense of motivation to do it, and I do get it done. However, there are people who have lives and the priorities aren't necessarily right. And it's not really I can't say to somebody, forget your kids, forget your dog, put fitness and health first. You have to realize that real life is real life and things get in the way, and not everybody thinks the same way, like, oh yeah, I've really got to be healthy and I've got to eat well, and things like that. So it's about balancing. So how are you and your care partners going to promote that sustainability of movement, exercise, health and well-being?
That is a really good question, and I wish I could say the simple answer is, but it is completely different for everybody, like you said yourself. So a really basic way to look at it might be about understanding what their locus of control is. So how they perceive the world. Are they in charge of everything that's happening? And if that's the case, how can you do an internal motivation? So they might be somebody who's really motivated by facts and figures. So you can say, right, we can look at getting you a smartwatch. You can measure your steps. We can give you some information about different studies that have been done. There's some like amazing studies out at the moment regarding exercise and health and well-being, particularly around cognitive decline in later life. So we might be able to look at some of those studies and say, look, if you do this amount of exercise throughout the day, you will reduce the risks of developing Alzheimer's dementia in your life or any other comorbidities that go with it. And then we might look at other people who would have an external locus of control. So they're like, it doesn't matter what I do, the universe has it all laid out for me. And those people might be a lot better to have like posters up saying this is what we're doing and why we're doing it and when we're doing it. So it's completely dependent on each person, how they are motivated, and having an individual assessment and looking at the most important thing is what is important to them. So I might say, you have to do your exercises where you're like ranging your shoulder 20 times a day. And if you don't do it, your shoulder is going to seize up. If they're not going to do it, then we can look at how do you incorporate that into their care plan. So I could say to the care partners, when they're doing their wash and dress, you don't lift the shirt over their head, get them to do it themselves. That just simple things like that.
Well, I absolutely love it. And it's so refreshing to hear somebody else who has had the same struggles when it comes to getting people to do things, and also and also finding ways of getting around that. And I think there's a common assumption that there's no way to work your way around it. Like if somebody doesn't want to do it, they're not going to do it. But there are ways to work up to it, and strategies that we can implement into people's lives to get them moving, whether it's okay, they're not going to do an exercise class, or they're not going to go to the gym, or they're not going to follow this YouTube video, but they might walk up the stairs once a day. They might use their legs to stand up from the sofa instead of pushing up with their arms, different things like that. And people don't realize that that's really, really important to be able to sustain movement and things we take for granted. So you've got this amazing project that you're working on. It's very current, and you're not sure how it's going to go yet, but I fully believe in all of it. So with that, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say I love your YouTube videos. I'm literally going to steal half the stuff that you do to get my clients to do it. And for me, I think if there was one thing that I was going to say to anybody when it comes to exercise, I think walking is definitely any way that you can mobilize. That is, as long as you keep that going, it doesn't matter about the gym, it doesn't matter about your squats, as long as you keep walking every day. That is the most important thing, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thank you.
And if we want to find you online or we want to connect with you, how do we do that?
Yeah, so the website is your standard www.sunday, as in the day of the week, care, as in a care agency, therapy, as in occupationaltherapy.com. I'll just like quickly tell you where we came up with that name. So my aunt, when she lived back in Brighton, Sunday used to be her favorite day of the week because that's the time I would go down and see her. So we decided to name the company after that. So it was Sunday for her favorite day of the week, care because it's a care agency, and therapy because we do therapy as well.
Brilliant. I absolutely love that. That makes my heart melt. And it's such a catchy title. Like I love it. It's very modern, but also loving. And you've got that, you understand exactly what it does. So thank you so much for sharing all that information and your journey and your story. And I look forward to following the future project that is the Sunday, I want to say it right, Sunday Care Therapy. No, I've got it wrong. Sunday Care Therapy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Derek. And
you.
good luck with everything.
My name's Rosaria Barretto, and thank you so much for listening to How to Age Well. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback means so much and helps others to find out about how to age well.